I have heard someone who works in business development, and he said when he changed his name to Kai instead of Khairul, he actually started closing more clients.
That's terrible.
We've run so many of these workshops with corporate people, right? And then they say, why am I here? My leader should be in this training program, not me.
Welcome to Singapore Unpacked, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director and also a former journalist. So today we're going to talk about something that is quite uncomfortable to talk about and not so easy to discuss. We all like to think that we are fair at work, that we treat everyone equally. But what if our biases are actually hidden in the everyday choices we don't even notice, from working, hiring to team culture? How do we deal with all these aspects? So in this episode of Singapore Unpacked, so we're looking at unconscious biases that will play out in Singapore's workplace and what it takes to turn awareness into genuine, lasting change. Joining us are Sophy Tio, Research Associate at the Institute of Policy Studies, who is coordinating IPS's training program on race, religion, and intergroup cohesion, in short RRIC, right? Yeah. And also we have Yulianna Frederika, co-founder of Lepak Conversations, a community platform that looks at facilitating sensitive dialogue on Malay-Muslim issues in Singapore. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Excited
having
to
me.
have this conversation. I think, talking about race might be uncomfortable, but I think it's necessary and important.
Let's have a lepak conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so first thing first, maybe you can set the scene. Like, we often hear the term unconscious biases, but what does it actually mean in the workplace context? Maybe we'll start with Sophie first.
Yeah, I want to start off by just setting the ground right and leveling the playing field, that to say that we are all biased in some way, right? Unconscious, conscious, it is all part of us in nature, and not a lot of people like to admit they are lah. So every time when we run our programs and people realize that they're actually biased through certain activities that we do, they get very defensive. They'll just say like, oh, I'm not biased, how can I be biased? I have XYZ sort of friends from this ethnic group. Cannot say I'm biased lah. But then they don't know how it seeps into their behaviours, right? And that's where it becomes problematic at the workplace. Yeah, so I'd like to see, we can unpack this further, and biases, how they affect individuals, called a social setting. And if you are in the position of, like, say, leadership or authority at a workplace, how that can actually also affect organizational behavior, culture, etc. So I think it's a good topic that we're talking about it to address it right now.
Yeah, so I don't know whether you have heard of this song before, like we're all a little bit racist, right?
I don't know. I've never actually heard of this.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a very old Muppet show that is played in the
okay.
Broadways. Yeah,
Right,
but
right.
for you, Ileana, what do you think? Like, what does this actually mean in the workplace?
What does it mean in the workplace?
For unconscious biases.
Adding to what Sophie said, it's not often known or seen precisely because it's unconscious, right? And it does take significant effort to be aware of it. And it is uncomfortable to notice it. And it is something that takes intentional, continuous effort, which is why, if a company perhaps doesn't see that it's important, it will feel like, oh, this is a burden and this is not important to us. But in a multiracial, multi-religious society like Singapore, it is important that we, treasure and appreciate and place a lot of importance in addressing unconscious bias at work lah. I think we can unpack that a lot more after this.
Yeah, like Singapore Unpacked, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but then what are some common examples that we observe at workplaces? I mean, Sophie?
Yeah, so it's not an indirect bias, but of course we always hear people slipping into their own languages at workplace, right? Because they're comfortable, and maybe because it's just more efficient for them. And we come across like bias or unconscious bias because it's how we are wired, right? We always take this mental shortcut, and we have to admit that biases, they do help us make decisions quicker and more efficiently. Same at the workplace. You want to make the decisions based on, your past experiences, and, you are sure that you're making this also because there is, you tell yourself, okay, that's probably going to be true because I experienced that before. Or, maybe my mom tells me that, to stay away from certain people, or certain people are stereotyped as lazy or etc. All these stereotypes that keep flying around. So that affects your decision at the workplace, right? Whether again it's a social setting where you choose who to hang out with, right, for lunch, or whether you make decisions on who you want to work with or who you are more comfortable with, and then that starts forming into cliques. So the repercussions are just things that unconscious bias, even though like what Yuli was saying, it's unconscious and you don't really see it, but it's the actions and the behaviours that then start becoming discriminatory in nature.
Yulianna, have you observed these kind of unconscious biases also? Like what examples have you encountered?
Actually, there's many.
Okay, list a few.
I think just adding on to what Sophie said, this whole concept of, we gravitate to what we feel comfortable with, right? And that also creates this sort of in-group and out-group. In-group that, you belong and therefore, nobody sees you as different or nobody alienates you. And if you're in the out-group, you feel excluded, you feel alienated. And sometimes people choose to hide certain traits about them that might make them stand out. Which is why...
What kind of traits?
Obvious one that I have observed is people anglicising their names. So making it sound not so Malay, for example. So I know, for example, if their name is Khairul, they will call themselves Kai. If their name is Amira, they call themselves Amy. And I have heard someone who works in business development, and he said when he changed his name to Kai instead of Khairul, he actually started closing more clients.
That's terrible.
So there is real consequences, real effects to how your name even is presented. So that's one example. And the other example that I hear very, very often actually is especially tudung wearing women, and when they walk into a certain office or certain workplace, and the people there usually assume that she's of a lower rank, like she's a secretary or she's a lunch lady or a janitor. And one of my friends, she's actually a C-suite level. So she walked in with her CEO, sat beside her CEO, who is this tall Ang Mo man, and people in the room just assumed that she was his secretary, but she's actually a fellow C-suite director. So it's this kind of unconscious bias, right, that's playing. Like, you see someone based on how they look, how they sound, how their name is like, and you immediately form certain assumptions. Yeah, I think those two to me are the most apparent, but really there are a lot of examples that we can give. And as I said earlier, it's sometimes it's hard to spot because even as minorities, we sometimes actively hide it because we want to fit in.
But do you encounter the issue of like the majority of them speaking in other languages?
I think I hear that a lot also. A lot of my minority peers, Indian, Malay, experience, for example, if it's a majority of the people are Chinese, then Mandarin is spoken. And I think it depends. I think the approach to it is also different, right? I think some people are a bit more lighthearted about it and they say,
Channel 5, Channel 5.
Yeah, change to Channel 5, But some people, I think, it gets a bit frustrating and also disappointing when this behavior is constantly repeated, because does it mean that you don't respect me as a person enough to speak in a language that I can understand? But yeah, it's something that happens very often.
Okay. Then Sophie, how do we deal with it? Like, do we like really actively call out like, hey? Or how do we like, do it gently so that the person is not embarrassed?
Yeah, I think a lot of people ask that question also, right? Like, is Singapore a call-out culture? And do we want to like see something, say something? And that's what a lot of people use in probably the more westernized context. They say calling out is the only way to address these like discriminatory behaviors, right? But we take into account the kind of fabric that we're working with, right? In Singapore, or rather also generalizing an Asian context being non-confrontational. A lot of people want to do something, but they are like, oh, what if, I get singled out, I don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. So having that sort of awareness, like what Yuli said at the beginning, and we call it strategic awareness, it's being not just, aware that I'm in this situation, but having to read the room, knowing your positionality. Again, if you are a leader, whether it's in your position to say it, or if you're not a leader, maybe calling out is not the right thing to do at that point, right? You make things worse. You make the person, the victim, quote unquote, stand out a bit more, right? Why, you're a troublemaker, etc. So what you can do at that point is also to blend that kind of allyship separately, check in with that person. And I always say, like, just checking in will already do a lot in supporting or showing your support to people who are subjected to this kind of behaviours. So it really depends. So you really have to read the room, know where you are coming from, know where the person is coming from. You also don't want to embarrass the person who said all these discriminatory remarks, right? Or these biased comments. So it's also respecting both parties, the aggressor, quote unquote, and also like the victim. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are, I guess, two different approaches to this. One is the more public way of addressing this.
Like,
yeah, like, hey, why you say that, But I think in instances where it's between individuals, say one person said a racial slur to another person and did not realize that it was a racial slur, I think it's perfectly okay to pull that person aside and say, hey, do you know what you said? It's a bit inappropriate. And then I think it's more a matter of establishing the awareness, the understanding, and making sure that that behavior is not repeated again. But if it's, for example, something that was done publicly, like, on your company chat group, company Slack, someone said something inappropriate and everyone saw it, right? And I think that's where the responsibility comes in for leadership to address it, because it was out in the open and it deserves that kind of attention and say like, oh, certain thing was said, yesterday or a few days ago, and this is the leadership stance on this, and this behavior will not be tolerated lah. We hope that does not happen again. So just to establish, I think, that safety and trust, because if it's a statement that was said about a particular person or a particular community, and then a fellow colleague is from that, identifies with that community, and then they might feel like, oh no, it's my office, an unsafe space for me, right? I don't know who else in the office shares the same views. So it's appropriate for the leadership to step up and reestablish that safety, right? Just to reassure this colleague that this is a safe space and we don't tolerate that. Yeah, so I think there are two different approaches to it.
Yeah, but when you talk about leadership, what if your leader is racist?
No, it's real. Like, we've run so many of these workshops with corporate people, right? And then they say, why am I here? My leader should be in this training program, not me. And I like how you mentioned about like the leadership actually modeling some of these behaviors to also clamp down. Like, say, our company doesn't stand for this. But unfortunately, if the leader is the one, right, it's not very easy to go against.
Yeah,
like
the power dynamics, right?
Power dynamics there, especially if you feel like it's wrong and you're only a junior staff. That's where things like infrastructure or structures or policy can kick into place to make sure people feel safe and they're protected when they want to stand up against something. Yeah.
Yeah, policies come into place, and I mean training as well, right? The IPS has Beyond Beliefs. That's koyak a bit lah. So unconscious bias training. But I do find also that it's not a very sexy term in Singapore, right? So I have been to workshops where, for example, it's about developing psychological safety in workplaces for productivity. So you use buzzwords that are so-called sexy to corporates, and they're like, and then you help them understand that taking care of racial, religious sensitivities at the workplace is a form of psychological safety. And when you have psychological safety, your team feels safe to express themselves, then productivity will increase. And if you have to go down to a level where you have to explain concepts or terms in terms of increasing productivity, then I say, so be it. I think I've seen that work in Singapore especially. Yeah.
In that context, right? Like, if all else fails, if you don't understand diversity, at least your angle is that you can help the company do better.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No. I mean that, and also that a lot of people are worried about the term DEI and what it means for the company.
Especially in this climate, right?
Yeah,
when DEI is a bit demonized now.
Correct. And they need to make make sense of that in terms of that that monetary value. Am I going to spend too much money? Is it wasted resources to even send my leaders for these trainings? What are the returns that we get, right? So we have to also, sometimes when we do our workshop, we have to set the context like, I know diversity is important, but that you need to see the value behind the money, right? Everything will lead up to the money, but firstly, your people need to feel safe. Then they can they can work harder, or they feel joy coming to work, and then your retention rate sort of goes higher, and then you have more diverse clients, more diverse teams, etc. So we have to draw the line very strict for them. Okay, sum equals to value dollar. But it is the case lah. They really have to see their returns in terms of KPI, or like having your board members on board with the money spent, etc. Yeah.
I think a lot. I think having diverse hires, it mitigates, potential, PR damage down the road when you realize, you actually, your products or your solutions weren't actually inclusive, and then consumers, give some backlash and you weren't sensitive enough. So personally, I think diversity in hiring is very, very important, right? So at the decision-making table, you make sure that you are sensitive enough, there's enough inclusion, and once it reaches the consumers, you know that there's already the intentional effort put in, and you've done your due diligence to make sure that your work is inclusive and as diverse as possible.
I feel like I know which example you're talking about.
Oh no, I don't have a specific example, but please share.
Was it the thing that happened 2-3 years ago?
Which one?
The e-nets.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's a very clear example lah.
And when the investigation went on, they actually realized that it was at the decision table where there weren't many minorities there.
Yeah, but of course, when we talk about DEI and talk about diversity, right? Sometimes it gets a bit dismissed also, right? Like these are just work concepts and all that. Yeah, but how do you all deal with it when people like try to dismiss it in a very broad stroke?
Does Lepak get a lot of that comments?
work concepts or like agenda.
I mean, when you talk about it along work lines, right? That to me in my mind brings me to the liberal conservative extremes lah. That spectrum, right? I think for us, generally we don't get those kind of comments of wokeism because we explain it in a way that Singapore is a diverse society, and allyship is one of Lepak Conversations' core value, in that we see the importance of non-Malays being allies to Malays, because there needs to be that natural desire to respect and understand one another, right? It's not about your rights or my rights, or you're asking for one up and this community gets more, that community gets less. As a racially diverse society, we should all see that we want to care for each other and ensure that it's, I guess, an equal playing field for everyone, right? It's not about being exclusive and protecting those resources for ourselves. Generally we don't get wokeism comments until it reaches a
very nasty person comes in.
No, it reaches the liberal conservative spectrum lah, which is like, why are you pushing for a liberal agenda, and I think if I can call out something which is usually seen as most controversial, most sensitive, is usually LGBTQ issues. So then that becomes like two very polarizing extreme ends of liberal and conservative, and how do you meet in the middle? So I think, and I have been in workshops where it was fine, everything was fine until LGBTQ came in the picture, and then you realize that it's very hard to meet in the middle, and then it's really about meeting people where they're at and trying to move them towards the middle ground. I think other things are quite easy to nudge people and see, like, we all share the same values, right? I think talking about values is a very easy way to find common ground. We value harmony, honesty, trust, safety, but then you bring in something as contentious as LGBTQ, and suddenly those values fly off the windows. I think for me, it's always important to try to bring in those common values and reiterate, like, for example, if you don't believe in someone else's, lifestyle or practices, can you at least respect it and allow them to practice it instead of, shutting them down, not giving them the space to do that lah. Yeah, so for me, it's always like a concession. It's always a balancing act. And we shouldn't see it as, one community is asking for too much. We all have needs. We all will have a time where there's a certain need that comes up, and we will want to get that need lah. And it's to me, it's a human right to have our needs fulfilled. Yeah.
So, but if biases are unconscious, right? Like, like maybe you secretly think of a particular person, a particular race in this manner and all that, then, how can individuals become more conscious and aware of them? Sophie?
Yeah, maybe I can also go back to the question about wokeism. And just recalling this example where I heard from a company in Singapore.
Okay.
Where,
we shall not name the company.
We shall not name where and who. That it became woke. DEI became a gender that was too woke in the sense that people felt unsafe saying their mind. So there's the other extreme, right? Like if you say anything you want to say, you can hurt people. But then now people are too worried to say anything. They feel like they're over-policed. And like, if you suddenly break out by accident into Mandarin with your friends, and then next thing you see an email from HR. I heard this incident happening at the pantry. Yeah. Maybe you all want to be more conscious of people who don't. And then suddenly they get very fearful, right? Hey, are you my ally? Can I speak with you? And can I be comfortable with you? Or will I be caught by the DEI
But that's very
police?
extreme also, right?
Yeah.
Because we also have to be mindful that we are living in a multicultural society, and people should be able to speak in their own languages too, right? It shouldn't be like totally wrong to speak in Mandarin or Malay or Tamil, Hindi.
There's a time and place, like you feel like the context allows for it. Yeah, so it's not just languages, right? Anything that you do will be like, is somebody being left out or no? Then they just get over and anxious about what they do, and then they don't start becoming honest with each other, right? You cannot break that colleague sort of boundary. We cannot become friends, and all the more we are fearful of making the wrong mistakes with something that you're not unsure of, but you're curious about. So you stop asking the person, can you share with me more about your certain practice? I want to know more. That kind of conversation that kind of environment doesn't allow for that kind of conversation anymore. So we have to be careful, like, when you're too woke or you're too worried about all these things, and then it defeats the purpose itself, right?
But too woke is, very conscious, very cautious, right? But actually what we see in Singapore's context actually is a lot of companies, they are quite careless, all right? Like, they'll be like, this one can eat one, why you so uptight about it, that kind of thing. So actually, that's also another issue that you need to take care and look after also, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's two things we're talking about, and that relates to your latest question, is that there is the policy level, right? We set it at DI as a gender at the structural level, but then your people are not ready for it. Right? So that's where the training part comes in. So you can have however many sensitive checks, or you can have however many like guardrails at the policy level. But if your people do not know what DEI means, or do not know how to start talking about these conversations constructively, then it's like macam clash lah. Like your organization and your people are not aligned with the values. So I think it has to come hand in hand. Yeah.
I think policy is policy, but there should still be room for flexibility because we're dealing with people. It's complex in that sense, but it also needs to be nuanced. And I think it's a lot also about just being intentional. Like if you want to speak in your mother tongue, sure. But then follow that up by turning to your colleague and say, oh, by the way, this was what I said. Translate it for them.
Auto-translate.
Yeah. Yes. So that they, in real time, they know what's going on. So that's a very simple habit. But it's a two-way thing. It shouldn't just be, the rule says this, therefore, I should not break it. And if I break it, there's consequences. I think it's also, and I've had this personal experience where one of my colleagues, I was talking about, doing my daily prayers, and then one of my colleagues asked, you have to pray 5 times a day. And I was 21, 22, it was my first job. So that was my first time being asked that in a workplace setting. And at the time, in my head, I was thinking like, wow, you how old already? You still don't know this kind of thing.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
But I think over the years,
There are
like,
really such people.
yeah, as I matured,
yeah.
I realized sometimes people just really don't know,
Yeah.
right? It's not out of malice that they don't realize these things. So I think it's also on the person receiving those questions or comments to approach it with curiosity. So now when people ask me, I'm just like, I'll just explain it to them because it's a question, right? But it's understandable for someone who keeps getting those questions constantly to feel like, oh, why is it that another community? Why does it feel like I'm not understood? Why does it feel like maybe other people don't bother taking the time to understand me? So I think all of this, again, we are human and our experiences are very diverse. So it's not to say that one experience is right, one experience is wrong. I think with someone who maybe feels a bit defensive when they're called out, then they need to sit with that discomfort of why are you not okay with being called out, for your disrespectful behavior. Why do you feel like you need control, you need power over everyone else? That's something that they need to sit with also. Yeah.
I like how you mentioned about how you need like two hands to clap.
Yeah.
So at some point we do also advocate it's not always the burden of the minority to share the experience with you. I mean, we always say you can ask whether they're comfortable with sharing the experience, and then and then go and read up on yourself also for yourself about these differences that you're unaware before going to a person and then and burdening them with your questions. So it's both extending that curiosity, but also understanding that it's not their burden to do that for you.
Okay. So I would like to move forward to talk about how do you recognize biases. Yeah, let's say you are of majority race in Singapore, Chinese, living in a neighborhood with majority and all, and maybe even in a SAP school, and you're not very aware of, and you don't really interact with people of minorities, right? So how would they be able to recognize their own biases?
Difficult. If they can recognize, then if there's an answer, straightforward answer to that, then we won't have any issues. To be honest, But I think going back to the point that we made, being self-aware that you can be biased is the first step. And then, of course, you can have your checklist in place. Before.
What kind of checklist?
I mean, so maybe if you're a hiring manager like HR, right? You have, like what Yuli said, you make sure that your team is diverse in the hiring so that the decision is not biased. But of course, you yourself will carry all these things. But then making sure that there are people who keep you in check, systems that keep you in check, etc. So that's something you can do at the workplace. But again, it's very tough job to unlearn things, because if you know how biases are formed, it's sometimes innate, sometimes it's also learned from our childhood. You have to unlearn and unpack a lot of that, and not many people first have to be aware of where it comes from, where it stems from, whether it's your mom, your parents, your historically, whether it's media saying that white is good, fair is always fairer, being fair is good, that kind of stuff. You have to do a lot of homework yourself. So that's that personal agency that we try to advocate for in our workshops, that coming to the workshop, you're not taking away just the fact that you're biased, but it's a starting point, that how do we address it, and knowing at what levels at the workplace this can manifest, and then stopping yourself before that happens.
I do think there needs to be some level of institutionalizing this kind of conversations about race and religion at different levels. And I say that because NYC has developed a race and religion toolkit. So it's a sort of, you can call it like a card game, conversation card deck, and they go to different schools, poly, universities, to have these conversations. And I facilitated those conversations. And since you mentioned SAP schools, I think I was very surprised.
I was from a
okay.
Awareness
for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm nothing wrong with that, right? I'm not saying that all SAP school students are
racist.
Oops, didn't say that.
No, it's not true.
Yeah, just oblivious to, I guess, racial and religious sensitivities. But I was surprised by, I think, the apathy, right? Because they use the toolkit uses case studies. Like, okay, if a Chinese friend makes a racist joke towards an Indian friend, how would you react? And I was quite shocked by the apathy in that they say, oh, I won't feel anything. But I realized as a facilitator, it was my job to meet them where they're at. Try to understand, okay, where is this apathy coming from? How can I get them to understand and put themselves in the shoe of the Indian friend? And earlier on in that session, I had asked them, like, is religion and culture important to you? And most of them had answered no.
Okay.
So then I brought that up.
So honest.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why we need these kind of conversations, even at a very young age, in schools.
Okay.
And Racial Harmony Day is one of those opportunities also to talk about race very honestly. And I think I'm definitely seeing a shift in teachers being more willing to talk about racial harmony beyond just wearing each other's costumes and learning more about each other's traditions and so on. So my experience with that group of SAP school students was, I used that what they said about religion and culture not being important to them, and I said to them, to you it's not important, but can you see why it's important to this Indian girl? Because she expresses her faith openly, right? She's wearing the bindi on her forehead, and that's a sign that religion is important to her. And through that process of getting them to put themselves in another person's shoes, they were able to understand and to see. So I think it's really just trying to see and be aware of unconscious bias is a muscle to practice, and it should start from young, in my opinion.
Start them young, so
start in schools and even PA if they want to run. I don't know, this kind of workshops whatsoever. I think that's very important as well, because I think a lot of times I hear minorities, their minority identity becomes most apparent in the workplace. And we don't want people to, and I think what that means is that people are only realizing these racial or religious differences very late in their adult years, right? Perhaps throughout their schooling years, throughout their younger years, they've never had to contend with it, and suddenly when they enter workplace, they are confronted with it, and then it becomes a bit more complicated because again there are policies, there are rules. If I say something wrong, I get penalized. So if we start there from young in spaces that are more open, then the risk is a lot less, I think. Yeah.
As you were saying, like, okay, we can start things young, right? Like start in schools to give them like awareness about different cultures and different religions, different races, right? But then what about companies? I mean, just now we mentioned quite a bit about companies, right? Then, I mean, other than like going for workshops, what are some like more structural things that they can put in place to remind the employees and employers to be mindful of all this?
Yeah, I think that's also a nice segue into the recent workplace fairness legislation, right?
Okay.
I mean, having passed that bill, right, it really signifies that signal the government's stance on discriminatory behavior along these protected characteristics. So the fact that the government has passed this, the companies that operate in Singapore context, it just tells them that, this is something that we value a lot in Singapore. And even whether or not you're MNC or whether you're a local company as SME, these are things that the values that we cherish, and it should be, we don't want to, be the iron fist, handling everything, but actually passing this responsibility back to the employer and say, yes, it affects the social fabric of our nation, but also it is valuable to the company, and everybody wants to feel like they belong to the company, and we want to have a healthy workforce, and so that's why the bill does signal that. And then I like the idea that the employees are now responsible for making sure that the organization is inclusive, Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to reference the wearing of the tudung or the headscarf in workplaces, right? In the past, without proper and clear legislation or guidelines, companies could say, "Oh, sorry, we don't want to accept women who wear tudung," and it's okay because other companies do it, other industries do it. But now with clearer guidelines, I think that of discriminatory practices, then employers have this responsibility to act according to it, and they cannot just they cannot give unreasonable reasons as to why they can't hire certain people. So I think legislation is very, very important to stem out discrimination right from the start. And because a lot of Lepak Conversations work at the start was really advocating for healthcare workers to wear the headscarf at work,
which was eventually
they did allow healthcare workers to wear it. What came out was women from all industries and all levels of seniority who talked about bias at even at the hiring stage. Even someone as young as 16 who's applying for a packing logistics job said she was denied the job because she was wearing the headscarf, and someone who worked all the way up to getting a PhD was still rejected by a company who said they don't want to hire someone who wears the headscarf. So I think now with legislations in place, hopefully these kind of incidences nipped at the bud and don't happen from right at the hiring process.
Yeah, that's why community advocacy is so important.
Yeah, but Yulianna, because maybe some people are not so familiar, maybe could you like explain a little bit more about like the decision behind wearing the headscarf and why is it so important to some of the Muslim women?
In the religion, it is obligatory on women who have gone through puberty to wear the headscarf, right? That's the religious guidelines. But by practice, it is up to the individual woman to decide if she wants to wear it or not. And so in 2022, I believe, when it was announced that healthcare workers could wear the tudung, MUIS, which is our Islamic religious body, released the guideline, which also said, yes, this guideline now exists, women are allowed to wear it, but the importance should still be placed on her personal decision. So now with this guideline, people can go to their colleague and say, hey, now the government say you can wear a scarf already. Why you still don't want to wear?
That's her decision, all right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
you should respect individuals'
so
decisions.
It's still an individual decision. Yeah. But again, but because it's an obligation, and if a woman has chosen to wear it, then it is actually disrespectful to ask her to take it off. And we can say like, there are women who have chosen to take it off, then sure, that's her personal choice. But there are women who are denied certain job opportunities, like that woman I shared about. She worked her way up to a PhD and wanted to work at this specific company, but she couldn't, and in the end she actually moved overseas to find other job opportunities. So the freedom to choose whether to wear the tudung or not affects a lot of women's career choices lah. Yeah, that's why it's so important.
Yeah, and it also extends beyond race, religion, right? Actually intersects with like gender.
Exactly.
Yeah, and even like sexual orientation.
Yeah, I think with the shifting demographics of our Singapore workforce, right, the added complexity of the expat, the local versus foreigners at the workplace does add to that mix, right? Even if we say that education plays a role in creating this awareness, but how do we bring that sort of values to people who are coming from overseas, right, to join us? And also as a company, we need to instill that kind of values, even though they might come from countries where multiculturalism wasn't part of their upbringing. So how can we ensure that yes, the locals brought up with this practice, and that the people who come also respect that lah? Yeah, so that's that complication.
Yeah, I think that's very, very complicated. Like for example, I do know a lot of my former co-workers. They were from maybe China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, where they are very like used to just one majority race, and they are not very familiar with our minority races in Singapore. So when they first come to Singapore, they will be like in it for a culture shock, and they don't really know how to deal with minorities. Yeah, so I think that would be quite difficult, and it will be, how do you do that like efficient? No, I wouldn't call it efficiently, but like more systematically. How do you integrate this kind of like our friends, workers from overseas, how do they understand our local norms actually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of this, I mean, the government is working on it. I know MCCY is placing a lot of emphasis on integrating them, but we often forget that integration is a two-way process, right? Like, we can, yes, provide them with the information about how Singapore was brought up in this multicultural landscape, but then it's also the locals who also welcome them and also share with them these norms. Again, approach everything with curiosity, share and the exchange, and that's what makes the whole process meaningful, and that's how you build, I guess, collegial sort of relationship with each other. It's not just like KPI, not just work, right? Everybody brings their own set of cultural norms, and that shouldn't come in the way of our performance. But if we don't address it, it will arise. Tensions arise when I don't understand why my Malay colleagues have to go out for Friday prayers. Right, I've been asked that before at a
Very some
MNC.
companies don't allow it, right?
Yeah,
some don't.
Yeah, and then I'm like, but then we have a meeting, and you are using that as an excuse. So having to also bridge that conversation and have mutual learning and respect is very important at the employers kind of level.
Yeah. I think anecdotally also because there are some food stalls and the workers, they couldn't really speak English and all that. And we saw online there are people who talk about it like, hey, do I have to learn Chinese in order to order food in Singapore, right? Yeah. I mean, Yulianna, how do you look at this, and how do you deal with it from the minorities' point of view?
Yeah, I agree with Sophie. It's a two-way street, and perhaps why those staff who perhaps are who are from PRC and they don't see the need to speak English is because it's acceptable for them to live in Singapore only speaking Mandarin, and probably because that's normalized, right? And so if we push back and we tell them, hey, Singapore is a multi-racial country, you can't just speak one language because there are many people who might not understand you, and especially if it's a service staff like a bus driver and this person is lost, and if it's a tourist as well, right, doesn't even speak English, and then how do you assist that person? You are in a service role, and it should be a requirement for you to speak English. So yeah, I think it's a two-way street, and personally for me, I like to look at the concept of neighborliness. I think maybe that's the first step to local foreigner integration, right? Like, before you go into workplaces, if you see someone who looks a bit different and living in your neighborhood, what do you do, right? Do you have that curiosity to approach them, or do you just keep to yourselves? And I think that kind of behavior carries over to workplaces, right? I think it's just important to look at these things with a lens that I guess is more acceptable and relatable, which is, this person is my neighbor. How can I help them, feel more welcomed in Singapore instead of seeing them as a threat or you're entering my space? I think it's always a matter of changing your lens and changing your perspective.
I mean, moving back to the Workplace Fairness Act, right? So, from what we read, that it was passed in January this year, and also there will be a second bill that was tabled last month, which focused on the dispute resolution process by proposing a framework that aims to help parties find a just resolution. So, I mean, what's the limit of such policies, and how far can it go, and where must culture take over? That's a very broad question, Sophie. You can try.
No, I mean, yes, it's necessary to have the second part, right? Because people always say like, oh, why is the company penalized for this, right? If something happens, I mean, that makes them accountable again for the things that happen within a company.
Especially for egregious acts, right?
Correct. After all, they're the ones who hired these people, right? All the processes. But what the law can do is just to, again, make concretize that these values cannot be, this, I guess, value and respect for all is important. Sorry, what was your first question again?
Okay, I mean, to what extent can the policy help to, make the workplace fairer? And to what extent that, is the limits of the policy and
Yeah.
how the workers have to. I don't think it's obey, right? But it's more like uphold the spirit
yeah.
of fairness.
Actually, interestingly, the people who are panicking when the law came out was that the HR managers. It's like, I need to make
more
sure
work for them.
Yeah, so there are a lot of cases where people tell me, oh, I have to hire lawyers, HR lawyers, because I want to make sure that I don't commit I'm not like liable for any of these things that, can be brought to court or whatsoever. So they're more cautious from that law kind of point of view, like the legal point of view that, oh, I don't want to be sued by my fellow employee, etc. So they're doing it out of like survival sort of instinct. Fear. Yeah. But then what is required of them is actually very simple things that should be there as a company, like grievance management, like one that is more transparent and one that actually more empowers the employees to feel safe to share about experiences that they have felt in the company that they feel like it's not appropriate lah. So basically, if you see it that way, then it empowers the individuals. It builds a trust system that, okay, if I do say something, it's going to be taken care of, and I'm going to be protected also. So often a lot of people do not come up to say these things, or not even go to TAFEP. If you know that there's TAFEP before this workplace fairness legislation, there's a lot of like phase involved in going to TAFEP. It's like, oh, if people know I went to TAFEP and complain, what's going to be the implication on me, right? So the bill ensures that the individual is protected when any of this comes about. And that really helps in the trust and the safe transparency that we talked about earlier, that they need to feel like they belong and whatever they say will be heard lah. And that really makes them feel more safe at work.
Yeah. But usually when it goes into disputes and goes into TAFEP and all that, it's already like, it's very hard to manage.
Correct.
Right? And the individual who is in the dispute would probably be prepared to leave the workplace, right? Am I right to say that? Or they can feel safe that even if they escalate it, they can still continue to work at the same workplace.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
There will definitely, when you escalate it to that level, there will definitely be tension between the individuals lah. Like, oh, you report me to HR, I don't like you. And it might worsen the situation even more.
Yeah.
So I think at a guardrails are great, right? But at a cultural level, again, there needs to be intentional, continuous practice of creating a culturally safe space for the team. And I think with processes, right, you talked about trust and transparency, and the reason why people might not trust processes is probably the lack of transparency, right? Like if I report this, how will I know that something will come out of it? So if, it has gone through the process and it's still something that cannot be resolved in an ideal way, then at least give an explanation, right? Like, oh, I don't know, this is beyond our capability and therefore we cannot do it and we apologize, instead of giving a generic of, oh, we've gone through the process and we apologize that, I don't know, that this is the outcome. It's it feels very robotic. But disputes are about relationship issues, and with relationships you need to also address the emotions behind it. So I think a transparent and clear outcome is very much appreciated in this whole process lah. But beyond that, things like having monthly surveys and checking in with employees, like how are you doing and have you faced anything over the past month, is a softer approach of making sure that there are no tensions that are boiling, right? And when you nip that out at the early stage, it hopefully won't reach that level where you have to go to TAFEP or you have to use the legislation. So yeah, that proactive effort to check in on employees consistently, I think that's needed.
Yeah, because adversely, like the employer can also like say that, hey, why are you playing the race card, right? I mean, you've heard this line before, right? I mean, how do we like deal with this kind of like disputes? Because it's always like he say, she say. Is it like, are you really underperforming, or is it more like the employer or like the supervisor's biases that's clouding the judgment of the person's performance, right?
And I think that's where, again, leadership comes into play. We use this term inclusive leadership, again, modeling the behaviors and making sure that the communication with your staff is very important, because whether or not somebody feels safe or belonging at the workplace, it's the perceived or the perceived experience or at the workplace of whether it's inclusive or not. It's not whether the leader thinks they're inclusive. I invited everybody, but she just said she don't want to come. It's not my problem. But then maybe the person who received that invitation was like, oh, but you're going to a place that has pork.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, okay.
It's not a halal restaurant.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Then your act seems inclusive, but then the person didn't receive it as inclusive. So, I mean, it's just, we have to take into account the perception of the inclusivity. So we always tell that, like, at the leader point of view, it's that you always have to check in again with your employees, and that you have to communicate that if you are not hired for this round, why? Right? You cannot let them speculate, like, oh, it must be because of my race, must be because of my religion, or maybe that day I said this thing. So I think the very clear communication is what leaders must possess. And if it's true, if it's a systemic thing, like, no choice, because they rotate promotions and it's not your turn up, then just tell them, because you want to seem like you are supportive of them and they know they can trust you, whether or not it's systemic or not. You as a leader must have that role to ensure your fellow teammates that you have their back.
So, now everyone is using AI, right? So what can companies and individuals do to stamp out unconscious biasness, and how has the use of technologies like AI changed the way workplace fairness has to be maintained? Yeah. Sophie?
AI, right? Yeah, like everybody's going to talk about AI and everybody has their own opinions about AI, but I feel like AI reflects human biases. But if it's well used and well trained, you can control how the bias manifests itself, how much bias manifests itself. I'm not an AI expert, but I do know that you can feed it the information it wants to be. So whether or not it's like how to hire somebody, and if the hiring process is blind, you don't have any sort of pre-historical sort of data of how you hired, that will be ensured that the process isn't biased, right? So you can utilize it for good, but you really have to train the person who's using it on how to use it right. Yeah. So again, there's a lot of human involved in feeding the data to this AI. So I feel like, yes, it can be used to optimize and to stamp out biases if used in the correct way. Yeah.
Yulianna?
Yeah, I share the same thoughts. I think AI is simply a tool, and humans can train it, right? It's all about the prompts that you ask it, the information that you feed it. So yeah, I agree that currently the AI model as it is, it does reflect human bias, but it is up to us to train it such that the bias is removed. And I think it's a useful tool, especially if, say, you're a company with not a lot of resources, you don't know how to go around addressing unconscious bias or hiring biases. If you feed the AI data about your headcount over the past 10 years and ask it to analyze how diverse is my headcount over the past 10 years in terms of race or gender or age, right? Those are very specific prompts that you can give to AI that hopefully, I would imagine that it will give a pretty objective review of your headcount, for example, if you want to review how diverse your headcount has been. So I do think in that aspect, you can train AI, you can use AI to review your hiring practices more objectively. Yeah, especially for companies that don't have that much resources to really look, go send for training, all those kind of things. I think AI can be a helpful tool. Yeah.
I also just want to add on, like you mentioned about training tool. What we do at IPS RRIC program is also we develop AI chatbots to sort of help us do the sensitivity training. So for example, when we always say, how do we practice intervention in a safe space, right? So what the AI chatbot does is to give you scenarios where you may encounter, but you don't know what to do. So then it sort of coaches you through the process of, is it okay to call it out? Is it okay to say, what approach should I take to call out this person? So we do that in RRIC, and it's been good. Like it replaces a human as like trainer actually in that sense. So the tool sort of gives people the opportunity to practice this in a safe space, and also in the event that they actually don't encounter this in the real life, to prepare them for something in the future, right? To help them comfortably speak out against racist comments or people who are discriminatory. Yeah.
Okay. So we're actually coming to the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
So soon, right? But if there's one thing you think that should be urgently rectified in Singapore workplaces, that can help to reduce like this kind of unconscious biases and racism, casual or not casual, right? What is one thing that you think it should be nipped in the bud?
One thing hard, but if we're talking about very, very early intervention, I think removing names from resumes. I mean, when we submit the resume, we can have it, but once it goes to the panel that reviews the CV, then perhaps the name could be removed. And I think CNA did an experiment about this.
Oh yeah,
where,
the documentary, right?
Yeah, they had a blind hiring process, and it did turn out that the Malay candidate got a salary offer that's $200 lesser than the rest. So I do think to mitigate it right at the start, I would want to see names being removed at the hiring stage lah. So blind hiring basically. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. What about Sophie?
This might be a bit controversial, but like, if I were to nip something in the bud, it would be all this tokenistic like monthly celebration. Oh, it's International Women's Day. Let's do this. And then it's
you don't want to celebrate it anymore.
No, I mean the keyword is tokenistic, right? If you want to do it properly. Don't do it because you got like KPI to hit. Yeah. So if you have a year kind of plan or a long-term kind of plan, then you jolly well do it, right? You know that there are no pockets of people that are missing out or disadvantaged in doing this. But then if you're just gonna do it because it's trendy or one group of people ask for it, right? You need to also like sit down and analyze, okay, if by doing this, who's left out? Who am I privileging over others? So yeah, don't do it for the sake of doing it, please.
Or at least celebrate it like in the meaningful way.
Yeah.
It's not just changing costumes.
Not just doing that.
Really understanding each other's culture.
Correct.
I think part of it is, I guess, giving the person from that community the agency to celebrate it how they want. Like, okay, let's celebrate International Women's Day, but then the one planning it are not the woman.
Okay, that's problematic.
So give agency. If you want to be meaningful about it, give them the agency because it's their celebration. So let them decide how they want to celebrate it. Yeah.
Very true.
Thank you, Sophie and Yulianna, for joining us today at this episode of Singapore Unpacked. If you enjoyed this episode, do follow or subscribe to the show, leave a rating, or share with someone who cares about Singapore's future as much as you do. Thank you all for listening in. See you on the next episode of Singapore Unpacked.